Today, we are diving into what is, without a doubt, one of the most brutal and pivotal conflicts in all of human history, the Battle of Stalingrad. This wasn't just a battle, it was an absolute meat grinder that chewed up entire armies and ultimately became the real turning point of World War II in Europe.
And to really get a feel for what we're talking about, let's just start with this. This quote. It's not from some historian looking back decades later. This was written by a German lieutenant, right there, in the middle of that inferno. It just perfectly captures the hellscape that soldiers on both sides were thrown into. It wasn't just war, you see. It was the complete and utter annihilation of a city.
So, the big question is, why? Why this one city, so deep inside the Soviet Union? Why did it become this obsessive focus for both Hitler and Stalin? Why would they pour millions of lives into this single shattered urban battlefield? Well, the answer is a mix of cold, hard strategy and some incredibly powerful symbolism.
And this breakdown really shows you the two sides of that coin. Let's look at the strategic value first. Stalingrad sat right on the Volga River, a vital artery for Soviet transport. If the Germans took it, they'd cut the country in two and get a straight shot to the oil fields in the Caucasus. But then, look at the other side, the symbolic weight. The city was literally named after Stalin. For Hitler, taking the city of Stalin would be an unimaginable propaganda coup. And for Stalin, well, losing it was simply not an option. It really became this personal duel between the two dictators, and their soldiers were the pawns. So the German push starts in the summer of '42, but the assault on Stalingrad itself, it began from the air. On August 23rd, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, unleashed an unbelievable bombardment. We're talking 1,000 tons of bombs. They basically flattened the city, turning over 90% of it into a sea of rubble. And this was before the ground troops even moved in. The goal was probably to terrorize the defenders into giving up, but what it actually did was create the perfect, broken, jagged landscape for the nightmare that was about to unfold.
And this is where everything changed. Germany's famous panzers, their tank divisions that were so dominant on the open plains, they were about to become almost useless. They were walking into a completely different kind of hell.
The Germans actually came up with the name for it themselves, Rotten Creek, the Rat War, and that's exactly what it was. A war fought not over miles of land, but for a single room, for a single staircase, for one pile of rubble. All that German technological superiority, the tanks, the planes, it meant almost nothing in the shattered urban maze.
This battle didn't have a clear front line. It was fought up and down and even underground. You could have Germans on the first floor of a building and Soviets on the second, literally trying to kill each other through the ceiling. Life expectancy for a new soldier was sometimes just a matter of hours. This is where snipers like the Soviet hero Vasily Zaitsev became legends. He had 242 confirmed kills. The Soviets even used the sewer systems to pop up behind German lines and cause total chaos. The fighting was just unbelievably savage, personal, and constant. To really grasp the sheer grit of the Soviet defense, you don't even need to look at the whole city map. You just need to zoom in on one single fortified apartment building. It became a legend, known as Pavlov's house.
And this number, 58 days, is just mind-boggling. For almost 2 solid months, one Soviet platoon, just a handful of men led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, held this one building against non-stop German attacks. They turned it into a fortress. It was so significant that on German battle maps, this one apartment block was marked as a major strategic objective. It really embodied the Soviet motto of the battle: for us, there is no land beyond the Volga.
This quote from a Soviet soldier, it really says it all, doesn't it? The experience was so extreme that the very concept of hell wasn't enough to describe it. Just try to imagine fighting in a place that makes hell seem like a walk in the park. That was just another Tuesday in the ruins of Stalingrad.
But here's the thing. While the Germans were bleeding themselves dry in the ruins of the city, the Soviet High Command, led by the brilliant General Georgy Zhukov, was quietly planning something huge out on the frozen plains surrounding Stalingrad. The hunters were about to become the hunted.
They called the plan Operation Uranus. It was a classic pincer movement, but on an absolutely colossal scale. And the goal wasn't just to push the Germans back from Stalingrad. No, the goal was to encircle and completely annihilate their entire Sixth Army. It was one of the boldest and most decisive strategies of the entire war.
Zhukov's genius was in spotting the weak link in the chain. So, step 1. Instead of hitting the strong German forces head-on, the Soviets smashed into their flanks, which were being held by less equipped Romanian troops. Step 2, once they broke through, Soviet tank corps just poured into the gap, racing deep behind the German lines. And finally, Step 3, the two pincers slammed together at a town called Kalach, snapping the trap shut. In just a matter of days, the entire situation was flipped on its head.
And just like that, nearly 300,000 German and Axis soldiers were no longer the attackers. Now they were the ones who were surrounded, completely cut off, facing total destruction in what the Germans called the Kessel, the cauldron.
Now here's the absolutely critical moment. The German generals on the ground knew they had to try and break out. It was their only chance. But Hitler, hundreds of miles away in his headquarters, flatly forbade it. He was obsessed, convinced his sheer willpower could change reality. He ordered them to stand and fight, promising that they would be fully supplied by air. This single order, born from pure ego, sealed their fate.
This chart just shows you how utterly doomed that plan was. Look at this. The trapped army needed a minimum of 750 tons of supplies every single day just to survive. The Luftwaffe, battling the brutal Russian winter and a newly confident Soviet Air Force, delivered, on average, less than 100 tons a day. The math was simple, the math was grim, and the result was inevitable.
So what did life look like inside that cauldron? It was a medieval horror show. Temperatures plummeted to 40 below zero. Soldiers were literally starving and freezing to death. Disease ran rampant, they ran out of ammunition, frostbite was everywhere, and with medical supplies gone, surgeons were performing amputations with no anesthesia. It was just a slow, agonizing death for an entire army. The end, when it came, wasn't a climactic battle. It was a slow, painful fizzle, taking place in the ruins of a city that was now nothing more than a giant frozen graveyard.
On February 2nd, 1943, what was left of the once invincible German 6th Army finally surrendered. This was a shock to the world. It was the first time an entire German field army had ever been captured and destroyed. The myth of the German war machine's invincibility was shattered right there in that frozen wasteland. So of the nearly 300,000 men who were first trapped in that cauldron, only about 90,000 were still alive to be taken prisoner when the surrender finally came.
But their ordeal was far from over. Of those 90,000 men who went into Soviet captivity, only 6,000 would ever see their homes in Germany again. Just let that number sink in. 6,000. The scale of the human tragedy here is almost impossible to comprehend. And that right there is the ultimate takeaway. After Stalingrad, the momentum on the Eastern Front shifted completely to the Red Army, and they never, ever let it go. From this moment forward, the path for the Soviet Union led west, all the way to Berlin. This was, without a single doubt, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany.
You know, Stalingrad is more than just a name of a battle now. It's become a metaphor for war at its most absolute, its most brutal. It's a terrifying monument to what humans can endure and what fanaticism can lead to. And it leaves us with a really heavy question to think about. When a victory costs millions of lives and the utter destruction of a city, what does that victory